Sabrina 90s comic issue 26. We started with Hilda saying that because she's going by Sabrina's school later, she'll drop her off. Sabrina shows her appreciation, and Hilda says with a chuckle that she should have said, "See you sooner than you expect." Harvey tells Sabrina that their history teacher's in the hospital for tests, and they're going to be getting a substitute. Oh, so it's Hilda. Hilda says that she's doing what Sabrina said to do off screen, and trying to get along in the modern world, which is why she took this job. She never showed any sign of having a problem with her aunts not having jobs before, but it kind of makes sense that she'd want them to know what it's like to make money the mortal way. Of course, Hilda thinks she's qualified to teach history because she's lived through most of it. Harvey's pretty optimistic, saying that it's pretty cool having your aunt be your teacher, while Sabrina is realistically embarrassed. Then after class, to skip past anything educational and pace-breaking, Sabrina tells Hilda that she did great, and she was glad to see that she didn't use magic. But then she somehow thinks Hilda's joking when she reveals that she turned one rude student into a frog. She would have to do that without anyone seeing, or erase her memory of it. I guess she'll erase his memory of being a frog afterwards. Hilda generously offers Sabrina a ride home, but she wants to walk home with Harvey instead, because she likes him that much, and Sabrina's bothered because a bunch of the guys were calling Hilda a babe. That was a very good makeover then. Hilda tells Sabrina at home to come see a videotape she made of Napoleon that she plans to show the history class. Wait, were videotapes around back in his time? Won't everyone be suspicious? Witches aren't allowed to change history. But then again, if she erases memories, it wouldn't matter that he was interacted with. Hilda could just say to her that the students would just assume that it was a historical documentary. Obviously the students would be a lot faster to assume it's a historical documentary and it's just obscure, because it would be crazier to assume that it was made by a time-traveling witch. Also, after Sabrina points out how the camera was too close up to Napoleon, complaining about how the Russian winter was brutal, the comic perpetuates the myth that Napoleon was short, when in reality, he only looked short compared to his tall bodyguards. He was only portrayed as short in propaganda to make fun of him. This wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for the fact that we're supposed to think Sabrina's world is Earth. But apparently in her version of Earth, this was the case. Hilda admits that Sabrina's right, and tells the reluctant Napoleon to shoot the scene again. And Hilda gets scolded into sending him home because she didn't want her to use magic to teach. Combine this magic with her having orange hair, and she was reminding me of Miss Frizzles. It was nice to see Hilda hug Sabrina with hearts, as she says that for a long time, Sabrina's encouraged her to meet people and get involved. And she's glad she finally listened. Sabrina's being really selfish here. It's okay for things to happen off screen, but it's so confusing. Too bad this will probably only be a one-issue plot point, because normally I'd be hyped at Hilda getting a job. She had jobs in the show just fine. This would be a positive change to the status quo that the sitcom wasn't too cowardly to do. Then several days later at school, Hilda wears a gown that ladies of the court wore in Elizabethan days. And the students think it's cool that she went through all that effort. And she almost gives away that she lived it back in those days. The principal says that Hilda's quite a character, complimenting Sabrina, as I wonder why he looks nothing like he's supposed to. Sabrina's happy that Harvey's paying attention to her instead of her aunt, but Harvey doesn't take the hint and instead infuriates her by asking her what flowers and candy Hilda prefers. So she slaps her own face and says that she's gotta put a stop to this. I'm glad Harvey was the last straw. She was looking pretty selfish. She would have looked pretty selfish if she got to this point because people other than her close friends were paying attention to someone other than her. And somehow Harvey doesn't know how he got her mad after that obvious hint. Sabrina makes it obvious in class that she's mad at Hilda, and Hilda tells her after class that she could have her sent to the principal's office. Sabrina asks her sarcastically why she won't just teleport her there, and Hilda has a good point when she says that she could have just as easily rented her dress. But she also has every reason to try to make history interesting for her students. She was being a great teacher. Sabrina says that she's too interesting. And I wonder if she's fake sobbing to manipulate her when she runs away saying that high school is stressful enough, because I don't think I remember seeing her sob before in the comic. Or if I have, it's still too rare to be in character for her at this point. Hilda fortunately feels bad for her because this is a well-written story. Then because the history teacher will be out for a year, the principal wants to offer Hilda his job. And now she's opposed to it because of Sabrina, who started locking herself in her room and not eating with them. Sabrina says to Salem that she's not hungry when he brings her a meal, and fortunately, she does have the self-awareness to ask if she's overreacting. good, because I was just thinking that there could be much worse problems in life than this. If anything, a student might be better off with all the attention being on their relatives instead of them if it means they get bullied less. They could do something embarrassing and no one would notice. I haven't seen Amy bother Sabrina at all. Because Salem started eating her food and ignoring her while Sabrina opened up to him that she just conflicted, she literally kicks him out of her room. Unfortunately, Hilda says that's the last straw as Sabrina lampshades this. It is interesting to see Sabrina feuding with her aunts for once, because this never happens. And because this is a good franchise, this is incredibly rare because it's meant to be funny, not a depressing drama. This is worth doing at least a few times though. It really helps that Hilda immediately regrets what she did and realizes she did something wrong. Hilda uses magic to bring Sabrina into the car to be driven to school whether she likes it or not. Fortunately, Hilda still tells her to have a good day in school, and Sabrina returns the favor. Then, as I predicted immediately, the history teacher's returned because he was magically cured in the hospital. And this directly contradicts the rule established earlier that witches can't affect the medical condition of a person for better or worse, which was a rule that tried to justify a plot point. So that plot can't be canon anymore. But that rule is extremely stupid and arbitrary, so it's worth retconning away. I don't know why Hilda didn't tell Sabrina about this. I guess Hilda really wanted this to be a surprise, to the point where she thought it was worth it to have to magically force her to go into the car with her. You'd think she would want her to stop being mad at her as soon as possible. The story ends with Sabrina telepathically thanking Hilda for putting things back to normal, and fortunately apologizing to her for being mad at her. Hilda's nice enough to call her sweetheart and admit that it was her fault too, and she says that it's more fun making history than teaching it. I'm just wondering why she can't get a job at a different high school at least. Wasn't that obvious? Also, I guess she has a teaching degree, and that's why she was even considered for the job. History degrees would be super easy for Hilda and Zelda to get. She could at least sap up a fake one, after looking at a real one. In the next story, Sabrina for once greets Salem in the way that you'd expect someone to greet their cat when they're in a good mood. But it's so rare of her that it's confusing that she does this now, especially since she just had a hard day. Which wasn't shown off because it'd be too boring, I guess. Salem says melodramatically that it's so hard being a cat, explaining that his breakfast crunchies were anything but. The bulldog from earlier chased him. That's his fault for leaving Zelda's property, and pulling his tail, which he confusingly admits. And then his afternoon sleeping was interrupted by the vacuum, when he clearly could have left Zelda's property and slept just fine. Sabrina's sarcastic, and as Salem keeps complaining, Sabrina wants to get him into the cat carrier. Why didn't she just teleport him inside it? Sabrina says while walking and carrying the carrier that he's been whining for days about being a cat, so now he has to learn a lesson. I can sympathize with her for wanting someone with an easy life to stop whining to her, but him being a cat was supposed to be a punishment. Of course he's not happy about it. He didn't always have to be one. Salem says he can't stand the suspense over where she's taking him, and she smirks in satisfaction at him melodramatically panicking. Wait, now she's casting a mute spell on him? What? If she can make him unable to talk, then why the hell did it take so long? I don't buy that's a hard spell to do either, so there's no explanation. This is smart writing in the context of this issue, but it makes the previous issues look dumb. Salem sees some more people checking in their pets, and assumes that's a pretty severe punishment for complaining about stale food. A short time later, Sabrina gets him out and holds him while petting him. Aw, that's sweet. And she says he's nervous as he's afraid of the doctor and thinks he's doomed. Then Salem realizes that he's on some elderly woman's lap being petted. Instead of him being put into the kennel, which is what I expected since Sabrina was acting mean and usually is mean to the cat, it turns out Sabrina was nice enough to have this smart idea, taking Salem to a retirement home. Someone says that that's the first time the old lady has smiled in a month. And we see that the retirement home is trying out pet therapy. That's a surprisingly heartwarming thing. Almost too much so. Then the story ends with Sabrina finally asking Salem about the remark he made about her diary. It's her fault for having the dumb idea to write in a diary in the first place. Of course it got read eventually. You'd think that a witch would be able to teleport her diary to another dimension though. And Salem's talking right in front of some mortals staring at them. So I guess Sabrina had to erase her memory of that. It wouldn't kill the comic to establish some consequences for the witches not even trying to hide magic, even if it's just they get fined for it. Then there's a comedy page where a pizza delivery man asks Sabrina if someone ordered a pizza. Sabrina says that she doesn't think she did, but since it's got triple anchovies on it, she realizes that Salem ordered it. He asks for money, saying please even, and she reaches into her jeans. So she did pay him for it. It was certainly nicer than her refusing to let Salem have the pizza at all, like I expected. But she still refuses to tip him. In the next story, Zelda magically slams the phone and tells someone to never call her again, naturally being frustrated at being given an excuse not to go to dinner. I can practically hear the voice of Zelda from the show as Zelda complains about modern men standing her up. It was the show that had Zelda and Hilda dating various men. It wasn't super common, but still, it's nice to see this be referenced, so for once I feel like the comic is actually a comic version of the show. Zelda complains that just a century ago, men were gentlemen. And she slams the door, saying that she'll be thinking about when they had manners. Is she gonna use magic? Is she so blinded by nostalgia that she doesn't care that sexism was a thing back then? I guess so. It's only natural to focus on the fact that things you liked got worse, or stopped being the case after you got older, because things are normally supposed to improve over time. Salem correctly guesses what Zelda's problem is, and Hilda says that late 19th century England is more Zelda's style. She giggles and zaps, and then Zelda brings a guy named Jack to meet her sister, and Hilda's scared. Salem says that Jack creeped him out already, and then predictably to reveal that he's Jack the Ripper. That's a really dark concept to reference for this comic. Why doesn't Zelda know he's this bad guy when Hilda does? It's interesting that Hilda can check the residual magic in the room and figure out what exact time period Jack was summoned from. I guess it forces her brain to think of the correct answer. Sabrina does live on Earth, and Earth had him on it, so this does fit with the tone. There's been high tension before, but the fact that Zelda's from Jack's time period still does not make sense because she should know better then. Of all the past boyfriends Zelda could have summoned, why him? Why didn't she keep summoning her favorite past boyfriend back to her if she can just do that whenever she wants? Why is she ever single? Why is Hilda ever single, if they're allowed to do this without consequences? Because they don't know which restaurant Zelda was going to, Sabrina looks in the phone book, and Hilda decides that they'll search for Zelda alphabetically. If this was modern times, Hilda would just call her on a cell phone. But she could always turn it off, since apparently she was already used to Hilda not approving of her dating Jack, because she didn't react at all to it. How many restaurants are there in their city? It'd take forever to contact her. Especially since she's at a restaurant starting with the letter R. Oh, he's Jack the Tipper! I could tell right away that was going to be the joke, because this comic has used puns before. And him being Jack the Ripper was jarringly dark. Still, you'd think he'd have remembered this from them. Is he the twin brother of Jack the Ripper? Is that why he still gave Salem a bad feeling just by looking at him? So instead of looking like an idiot, Zelda looks like a jerk by telling him to stop tipping people. She doesn't want him to keep handing out rare old coins to everyone. Because, what, he's attracting attention? Who cares? The masquerade about witches is kept no matter what happens. So why should she be worried? Shouldn't she be happy that he's so charitable? She probably would be in the sitcom. He even tipped people who don't work here. She tells him that he's causing a scene, but since she's yelling, she's not helping and only making herself look bad. The story would have kept working as having great tension if we didn't see this page. But to be fair, you could be under the assumption that it's still Jack the Ripper and he's just a great tipper because that's an extra part of his character. Maybe trying to make up for being a jerk. Instead, I can't care anymore about them trying to contact Zelda because now you know there's no danger. Realistically, it's getting late and Hilda's still in the seas. You'd think they'd be able to use scrying and stare into a crystal ball and find her immediately. These witches have telepathy. Wouldn't they just telepathically warn her immediately? Zelda should have explained that she had turned her telepathy off or something. She said she's gonna call home on her magical spell phone. And it's smart that Sabrina's been checking restaurants in person at the same time. Salem tells Hilda over the phone that he dumped Zelda's garbage and found a crumpled note that says Rodolfo's. So he was useful. And Hilda's Sabrina's familiarity with the city comes in handy because they know exactly where the restaurant is. Then they hear Zelda screaming, and suddenly she says that she knows her date isn't who she thinks he is. Hilda's relieved that she's okay and slumps over, while Zelda complains that Jack's nuts and she should have known, as he's told to scram and called Pops for offering the cop money too. And I guess the cop thinks he's just playing a role for calling his car a horseless carriage. I guess Hilda's problem was that Jack was focusing on everyone except her. and in that sense he was being a bad boyfriend, but all she said was that he was causing a scene. This issue is by Mike Gallagher. The first story is about Hilda becoming Sabrina's substitute history teacher, and accidentally getting Sabrina mad at her for a while from drawing attention to herself, and causing even Harvey to ignore her. It made sense that she'd take advantage of her personal experience with history and become a history teacher. I guess she did it in Sabrina's school so that she'd get to spend more time with her. And while it was interesting to see Sabrina feud with her for once, it was long enough that I was glad it was kept to one issue. At least Sabrina admitted that she might be overreacting. It is all resolved when Hilda heals the history teacher, which of course witches can do after all. The second story was surprisingly heartwarming, where instead of Sabrina punishing Salem for whining, like the entire story built up to, she brought him to her retirement home's pet therapy to show him that it was still great to be a cat. It made sense that she let him agonize over the suspense at first, because she still wanted to punish him for whining too much. Except if she doesn't like hearing him complain, why did she smile at it here? She just wanted it to be a surprise, and probably figured that Salem wouldn't want to look like a softie by agreeing to it after being told about it. The third story was about Zelda's summoned boyfriend from old times being Jack the Tipper, not the Ripper, which would have been dark. And since we were showing how much he was tipping people while Hilda was trying to look for Zelda without revealing magic, instead of afterwards, the tension was gone the minute I saw him tip someone too much. That was certainly a pun, but I'm left to just assume that he was the Ripper's twin brother, since otherwise Hilda and Salem wouldn't have been scared of him and jumped to conclusions so fast.